Hello and welcome to this week's episode of Hashtag Leadership, What's on Your Mind? Remember, we're a podcast to make you stop and think about your leadership journey, and we're going to add tons of value by speaking to amazing people, amazing stories and experts in their field. So if you haven't already and you're watching us on the YouTube channel, make sure you hit subscribe. And if you're listening to us on your podcast provider, make sure you hit follow. So today we're speaking to Steve. How are you doing, sir?
Doing wonderful. Wonderful to be here, Stuart. Appreciate you having me.
Yeah, do you know what? I'm a little bit flummoxed by this introduction because we've only just literally caught up and been introduced by Steve's sister over in the UK, and you might have spotted a bit of an accent in Steve as well. He's over in America. He's going to introduce himself in a second. However, we've just discovered that we swam for the same team over here in the UK, and we've probably 100% would have swam in the same swimming pool when we were younger. So as you can imagine, we spent a little bit longer doing this little bit of hi, nice to meet you from a connection on LinkedIn. So anyway, before we get carried away on that, and we might mention a little bit, Steve, as I hit the 20-minute timer, would you please introduce yourself for the people who don't know who you are? Off we go.
Absolutely. So my name's Steve Mellor, and my entire background has always been in the sport of swimming. And that's how Stuart and I apparently met earlier in life. And so for me, anyway, the way I like to describe it is I swam my way to the United States. It's not quite as literal as it sounds. But I was a part of the British swim team growing up and became an athlete over here in the US at a college, at a university, North Carolina State University, and spent pretty much the last 15 years in the sport of swimming at the college level here in the US. I spent 4 years as an athlete and then most of the last decade as a swim coach, and decided to take an entrepreneurial jump away from swim coaching into my own business, Career Competitor, where today I am a performance coach and a culture consultant for business owners and companies, both here where I'm based in Louisiana, but also around the United States.
Yeah, amazing. We're going to talk a little bit about, I love talking about the link with sport and what sort of background and tools that gives us, because I think that really helps where I am today, and I know it does for you as well. So let's go through the questions. So we'll see hashtag leadership, what's on your mind? What comes to your mind when you hear the word leadership?
The word expectation has always been attached to that. But as I've started to work in this space that I am now, the word intention has probably now moved to the top in terms of what I prioritize with leadership. You know, one thing that I've always seen in the world of sport is that there's two types of actions. There's one where someone shows up and acts, and then there's another one where someone intentionally shows up and acts. And the difference between the two, when you're a coach, as long as I coached in the sport of swimming, you can see the difference in a group of 20 athletes between the ones that are there just doing what they're told to do and the ones that are there intentionally doing what it is they want to do. And more often than not, the ones that show up with intentions, they're natural leaders without even necessarily signing up for the title, if you will. So leadership starts with that of intentional action. And once you start to prove that you're someone who's capable of delivering such things, now you move into this position where the opportunities are endless. You can talk more, you can hold people accountable more, you know, because your actions speak so loudly, the opportunity to then truly do some of these more well-known versions and attributes of leadership. You know, you have that ability to do those things, but it all starts, in my opinion, Stuart, with that. Am I willing to intentionally act when it comes to what I do each day?
Amazing, John. I love that. I always say this about asking that simple question, which on the face of it has lots of definitions attached to it, and we're 100+ episodes now, and how different and unique everybody's answer to that is. But I love that, just adding that one word intention to it. I think everybody will be able to pick up of knowing somebody that they've seen have intention and what that looks like and how that shows up. It's very purposeful, isn't it? So I love that. It just brings some really good pictures in my head about what I've seen people or when I've been in that before as well. So thank you very much for that. Staying with you personally, we always ask people about how far back your leadership journey started. So whether it was on reflection, now I've asked you about it, or was there a light bulb moment at the time? How far back do you think your leadership journey started?
Yeah, I love that question because it's something I've spoken to people more than I would probably expect to, when it comes to people ask it when they say, when did you start coaching? And I've had that reflection process so much, especially in the last 10 months since I started my business. And then I start going, well, I think I was actually coaching before I even knew I was coaching. And the same goes for leadership. It's like sometimes you can be 2 or 3 years into leading people before you suddenly start to realize, oh, I'm a leader. Like I'm I'm doing this. I'm actually, people are following me, listening to me, etc. And for me, that started way back the moment I set foot on US soil, in 2005, when I moved to the US and I started competing within the university system. Because going back to what I was saying before about intentional action, I had a way that I would go about what I did. And coming from the UK, if you're in that elite performance in the UK sport, it's a very small group just because of the size of the UK. It's a small place in comparison to the US. Whereas every turn you take, it feels like here over in the US, when it comes to sport, you're met with elite performance. So when I arrived, I came with this elite mindset in terms of how I carried myself, what it was that I did. And before long, people were gravitating towards the way I went about my business. And slowly but surely, I saw the benefit of actually not just showing people the direction, but actually bringing people along, finding ways like, how do I encourage you to see this from my perspective? And instead of you just watching what I do, how about I actually explain why it is I do it the way I do it? And those conversations all started, like I said, when I was as a freshman here at university. And before long, I was a team captain. And then before I knew it, I was coaching. And again, once I actually pressed pause and reflected a little bit there around sort of year 3, year 4, I was like, well, I've kind of, from the moment I got here, I've been leading people without even necessarily realizing it to begin with.
Do you think, I'm going to press you a little bit on where those fundamentals of being able to have that skill set and not even being aware of it? Do you think, is there anything that goes back even further than that? Because you kind of how you were brought up, your environment, is there anything you can pick out from there that got you in that position in the first place?
Definitely, yeah. I was the most fortunate thing that ever happened to me in the world of sport was that I was asked to be a part of this group of athletes in Stockport, and swam for Stockport Metro swim club in that area. And in 2003, I was asked to train with this select group of guys that were training for Athens in 2004. And I was not going to that Olympic Games. I was not at that level. I was never going to make that games, but I was with 4 guys that were very much expected to go, and then one step further, perform at very high standards once they got there. People may know the name Steve Parry. I swam with Steve that year. He actually was my connection from the UK to the US. He got me to collegiate swimming in the US, and he's doing incredibly well for himself now off the back of the bronze medal that he won at those games in 2004. But I was just, as far as I was concerned, I was just Play-Doh being molded into a leader that year. That's what I was in 2003. I was everything that was going on around me. I was just like, pay attention to this, pay attention to that, keep your mouth shut and just follow. And there's so much that you can be absorbing right now. And so for me, that was amazing to get that experience at an age where I was only 18. These guys have been doing it at a highest level for a long time. And they very much ingrained in me, this is how we do it. And at the time I was naive to that. And by the end of that season, I almost feel as though I'd gone through a form of education that most people would probably need like 10 years to go through. I did it in like 10 months, and it was easily the most impactful 10 months of my life.
Yeah, I think you mentioned then a little bit of conscious and subconscious. I think sometimes you don't realize what you're picking up, do you? And obviously now you're very thankful for it. And yeah, I think, and again, it screams kind of like people, I know that you have this mindset, that lifelong learning. And there's no end point, is there? It's constantly sponge and like eyes wide open. I say about the stuff I had in the military. I'm even more thankful for it now. But at the time, it was like, wow, I don't think I realized how lucky I am to be exposed to these people and this process and environment, which is similar to what you just mentioned then. So fantastic. I love this. So regards to your journey, staying with that, up to now where you are today, we asked people to think about, was there any impact moments that either an event or a person had to build who you are now today on your leadership journey? So whether that be positive or negative, what sort of things would you pick out?
You know, for me, I think this is an opportunity to definitely be more transparent, honest, and maybe sort of flirt with that negativity too. Is when I look at how I started swim coaching, when I first, so I moved from North Carolina State University to Louisiana State University, which is where I live to this day, here in Baton Rouge, Louisiana. And Louisiana State University is one of the sort of 9 or 10 universities that if you see someone walking through an airport in the US wearing one of their t-shirts, someone will shout and say like, hey, you know, the mascot's the Tigers, and they say, go Tigers. Like someone shouts, go Tigers at you. So, you know, you can't, the university I was working at for 10 years is connected to elite sport, period. And it's a household name. So when I came in, despite being very early on in my coaching career, I felt the need to just be something that I just frankly wasn't. You know, I wasn't a proven coach. I wasn't a proven leader in this particular area. And yet I was trying to carry myself as though I was. And I was adamant about people listening to me. I was adamant about insisting that my way was the right way. And the one of my probably greatest attributes has always been to be able to notice when I'm going in the wrong direction, you know. And for me, I learned that lesson pretty early on that first year, when I had a group of athletes pretty much stop listening to me for a couple of days. And I just realized, this is my fault. This isn't their fault. This is me turning my messages into noise. My messages have turned into noise. They're no longer messages. They therefore cannot be impactful. And I only have myself to blame. And I'll never forget the meeting that I had. That was, you know, I'm 25, 26 years old at this time, you know, still very young. Sit down with a group of about 8 or 9 guys and really just apologize, start over. We're about 2 months into this process. And I just explained to them, I was wrong. You know, I have an opportunity here to make it right. And the best part about that, Stuart, was because I decided to have that conversation, that year turned into one of the best seasons that the swim team had had in a long, long time, because that moment of vulnerability on my part was just enough for those guys to say, okay, this guy isn't just coaching us. He truly wants what's best for us. And he's willing to give himself to us in a way where he's allowing us to get to know him. Yeah. And again, to your point earlier, sometimes you don't even know what you're doing when you're doing it. That's what I was doing in that moment. I thought I was just kind of making the wrong, you know, and so for me, looking back at that and thinking, wow, had I not had that conversation, I may never have coached beyond that 1 year. You know, that decision to have that vulnerability and honesty and transparency with my athletes very much shaped how I coached and what happened within my coaching career from that day forwards.
Yeah, I love that, again, because how true is that of leaders now? Like I see there's been a shunt forward in a positive way, and leaders really having that self-reflection of, I need to be more honest, I need to be more open, transparent, vulnerable. And it shows up in loads of different ways. It's not necessarily what some people start thinking, oh, that's a bit warm and fuzzy and a bit pink and fluffy, and it's not that, is it? But that exact story you gave. And again, when you explained that, I was imagining that sliding door moment, and we talked about, and like, we may as well cover it now, about culture, because that was a sliding door moment for you. Of that you could have done nothing, and then talk about that word of toxic culture. It would have probably got worse and worse and worse where you actually dealt with it. So in your sort of work now and your vision, it's a big topic, culture, isn't it? Yeah. How does it show up in the work that you do now? So
what I like to do with anyone that I work with is paint the ideal picture. You know, start to say, okay, this is what we want. So now that we know what we want, let's start describing a little bit more about where it is we are. Because sometimes people would like to start with where it is we are, but by framing where you want to go, sometimes it can allow you to start to look at where you are through that lens. Because I'm a forward thinker. I don't want to you know, put out fires, so to speak. I want to look at you and say, okay, it may feel as though a lot's going wrong right now, but there's going to be something in there that's going right. There's going to be something in there that we can work with. And one thing I like to do is meet with people and talk about what I've coined a community of purpose. Because for me, those two words, community and purpose, that's the secret sauce to culture, as far as I'm concerned, and what I've seen in my worlds. And when we look at our workplace as a community versus just simply a workplace, well, suddenly now we're starting to maybe have a little bit more value for those that are a part of it. You know, it's not just these four walls that we walk into and walk out of every day. It's now a community. It's now part of us. And the beautiful thing about a community is that you feel that you can come in as your truest self as well, which is a huge part of culture today. And that is probably the one topic, authenticity. That's the one topic that I find myself having to explain and talk about a lot, specifically with business owners, because a lot of leaders and business owners, they want people, historically, they want people to think as they think. They want people to do as they do. And I understand that. But at the same time, you sort of go, well, listen, in order to do that, they have to be less of themselves. You see that, right? You know, if you're asking someone to be more like you, it's a math problem. More like you means less of them. And so from a cultural standpoint, how can you encourage people to be their authentic self? Well, you start by trying to create a community. And when you start talking about community, we talk about a business's mission, you know, their principles, their values, all of that sort of stuff. And then the other part of it, like I said, is purpose. Purpose comes from a community. When the community is right, when authenticity is welcome, suddenly people feel purposeful in terms of they want to be there. Someone that wants to be there, again, going back to that very first thing I described, intentional action. Intentional action is something you see in a purposeful individual. You know, so that's, for me, community of purpose is a great way to describe the ideal culture. And that's where I like to present that at the beginning of my work with leaders is, if we're working towards this, what examples of that do you maybe already have? And what's preventing you from having more of those examples within the workplace?
Yeah, I love that. It's such, and I know listeners will be able to resonate with that, because it starts making you think and see opportunities to create that. And there's no better time than now with, and again, sometimes going into that digital leadership and online leadership and people almost stepping further away from each other, that it's even more important to create that community and bring together. And it's easier to do than ever now because of all the tools we have and the opportunities, but it needs somebody to think about it to make it happen. So going back to swimming, because that's an anchor for us. I always say that I think sport, and I mentioned about, before we jumped on, about our sports background and my military story, it gives us loads of tools to be able to then step forward into a multitude of different environments. What do you think sport, or specifically swimming, are there any analogies that you use from swimming? Are there any things that have really helped you pull from the sporting world that can then be imprinted on somebody that maybe hasn't had a sports background?
Yeah, it's funny because having gone through it as an athlete as all encompassing as I did, and then to transition into coaching, and kind of similar to what I was saying there before about doing what I thought was right to begin with as a coach, and then sort of slowly figuring out the way to do it correctly. You know, swimming for me is one of those sports that if there's not enough of a relationship built between an athlete and a coach, or just even between the athletes themselves, it's very easy to get lost in the commitment that comes with the sport. You've been there, I've been there. You know what it's something a coach says, you got to come to all these morning training sessions and stuff like that. You say, okay, sounds good, I'll do it. And slowly but surely you start to resent maybe that process a little bit. And swimming has that way of doing that to an individual. So one thing I have taken from swimming, believe it or not, is the importance of prioritizing the self, you know, really allowing the self to say, okay, is this a process that is working for me? And if it's not, what can we do to maybe shape the process in a way, you know, tweak it, tailor it, whatever, however you want to put it, do it in some sort of way that allows a person to say, yeah, I feel better about this process now that we've sat down and we've spoken about it. And that is so applicable, right? In terms of the corporate space is, you know, you think about out, you go back to when you were 13, 14 as a swimmer, how much you wish you could have just had 5 minutes with a coach and just say, listen, it's not that I don't want to do the work. Is there a way we can maybe work around this process so that it doesn't feel like it's taking over my life, you know? And so for me, I never wanted an athlete to come to me and say, I don't have time to have friends. I don't have time to just do what I enjoy doing outside of here. And what's funny is when I actually started my podcast 4 years ago, that was my way of showing athletes at the time when I was a swim coach, hey, you can do this and you can do something. You can have a hobby. You can have something else in your life. And I wanted to be that example. I was like, you know how hard I work, guys. you know, you're here with me. We're doing this together, but I still have an hour for me. And this is when I was getting married and having kids, you know, I could still find time for me to do me. And so for me, that's a really powerful message as far as I'm concerned that I've taken from swimming. But I learned that through experience. That wasn't something I got straight away. It took time to figure that out.
Yeah, amazing. I know that will resonate with so many people because we get, I've not said it for a couple of episodes, but that busy being busy mentality that I saw when I left and came out of the military bubble. It was like, you've got to put your foot on the ball and have a little prioritize and a little bit of selfishness in there, which is really important. So, Steve, that is the end of our 20 minutes. I'm going to give you an opportunity, though, to advertise your podcast, but also tell us a little bit about your book that's coming out in a couple of months.
Yeah, thank you, Stuart. Appreciate it. So Career Competitor is the podcast. The little tagline that I have for it is we light that competitive fire within you in order to either improve upon or optimize your career. And so for me, it comes from my background in sport of taking athlete mindset and traits into the world beyond sport, whichever you may compete within. So that's the podcast. And then the book I actually have coming out, it's going to be about the middle of October when it's released. It's called Shock the World, A Competitor's Guide to Realizing Your Potential. My life has been pretty much one opportunity to realize potential after another. And the way I like to describe it is that there's more examples of failing in this world than there are of actually succeeding. And too often we get caught up in those examples of failure and we don't go and chase our potential because of it. So the book is very much encouraging people to say, you know what, I see that we maybe fail and this may not go well, but why not try anyway? Why not give it a go? And why not see if I can be the one that shocks the world by realizing my potential?
Amazing. I love that. So we're going to have all your tags on the show notes. But again, when this comes out, I'll do another promotion and people go and check it out. So Steve, thank you so much for your time today. I know we're going to catch up after this episode, probably more than usual as well for guests. And this will be a start of a good relationship, hopefully, and we'll catch up. So ladies and gents, hope you like this episode. And remember, every Wednesday at 6 a.m, we've got amazing people coming and sharing their expertise and their amazing stories. If you haven't already, make sure you hit subscribe on the YouTube channel and you like and follow us on your podcast provider. Make sure you pass it forward. I always like to hear your personal takeaways from each episode because, like the hashtag leadership what's on your mind question, it's different for every single person. So that's us done for today. I'll see you all next week. Take care. Bye.